Rasanath. We're switching gears because my last podcast, my mother, you'll appreciate this because you know my mom called me saying we are in a little bit of an argument over the last few days, but she called me and she's like, I listened to your Kelly Catrone episode. That's a friend of mine who's like a PR maven and wild woman. And she's like, I listened to your Kelly Catrone podcast and oh my God, it's trash. I thought this was supposed to be smart and cultural. And I'm like, well, why didn't you listen to the episode with Dr. Vora, the psychiatrist, instead of, she's like, and you were talking about what if you and her were iconic lesbians together. But my mother's highly critical of me and whatever. She is. And I had one of my like,
I've seen her.
One of you have, right? I know, you know her, but one of my like groundbreaking, like most painful realizations of like who I am and why I am the way I am happened during a workshop at the Bhakti Center when we were doing some kind of, I guess it was the Enneagram program, and we were doing, or maybe it was the Bhagavad-gita, I don't know, and we were doing an activity, and I can't remember for the life of me what it was, but I realized in that moment after seeing Hari's parents, and like they were talking about like Hari's mom was talking about how her husband, Hari's dad had protected her when like someone like yelled at her like on the train or something.
Right. Oh, wow.
And I remember I started crying hysterically. I'm like, and this isn't like, I hope my mom doesn't listen to this, but I didn't feel like, I realized in that moment, like I've not felt protected. Like I have not felt protected by people in my life, like boyfriends or my parents or whatever it was, I've had to create this, like, I'm protecting myself and I'm this tough girl and I'm, and that's not even really who I am in a lot of ways. Okay. Anyway, let's back it up. And I've just been talking nonstop, but I'm just so excited that you're here. I'm like so excited
Me too.
We're here together,
It's been such a journey.
It has been a journey.
And for both of us.
I mean, seriously, like we've both been through so many changes since we met each other. I'm going to let everyone know how I found Rasanath. I was at my parents' house and was looking through books and I found the Bhagavad-gita. And I had no idea what the Bhagavad-gita was. And I just started reading it. And I said to my dad, what is this book? And he said, oh, the Hare Krishnas gave that to me in the 1970s. And I started reading it. And when I started reading it, I felt like I had found a magical, like I felt like I found a treasure chest full of gold or something. Like I was like, what I was reading and how I was relating to it and the things I was feeling, I was like, what is this? So I started Googling Bhagavad-gita, New York City, NYC, like just... And then a TED Talk came up with you talking about meditation. But in that TED Talk, you were speaking about how you were working in finance and living in a monastery, which was the Bhakti Center on 2nd and 2nd, right? Or is it first and first? First and first.
Second, yeah.
This is a very interesting concept that a monk would be working in finance or someone in finance was living in a monastery. How did that happen?
Well, I wanted to work on Wall Street since I was in 8th grade. So I grew up in Mumbai, India. And I grew up, it was a very interesting time because in the early 90s, India opened up its economy. A lot of Western money came into India. Also came Western TV. A lot of Western money came into India. Also came Western TV. And I was in 7th grade, 8th grade. And I remember clearly watching the movie Wall Street for the first time.
I knew you were going to say that.
Well, it's sometimes truth is stranger than fiction.
Right.
It literally was, watching Charlie Sheen with 2 phones, like, writing on his... And something about it, I didn't even understand what Wall Street was. But something about the energy of the place just affected me. It felt like, well, this is where I want to work. And yeah, I made my way gradually to working on Wall Street.
Yeah, but what college did you go to?
Yeah, well, I went to I.I.T Bombay. So in the Indian Institute of Technology is considered to be like the M.I.T of India.
Right.
And usually in the university, so it's just to give a sense of the acceptance. They have a 1.4% acceptance rate.
Wow.
Which means
which means no one gets in, pretty much, except for Rasanath, like two other people.
Well, this was my first big existential crisis, actually, when I was in the university in my first year. I realized I was in the bottom percentile of my class.
Right. Will you talk about that? I think you talk about the test, right?
Well,
at Bank of America. That was later.
That was after I finished business school. But even at that time, even during undergrad, I had this experience at I.I.T. where even if I worked 24 hours a day, I would still not be able to ace my tests like some of the kids that I was going to school with. And it did create a sense of inferiority complex.
Yeah.
And that was the first time I really started asking questions about, well, what's the purpose of my life?
Had you already, now, did you grow up bhakti?
No, I didn't.
Because your parents aren't.
No, I didn't. I grew up in a very pious, I could say religious household.
So what, secular?
It's not necessarily secular. So you could say Hindu because I grew up in India.
Yeah.
It's predominantly the religion. The philosophical basis was never really explained to me. But I grew up in a very loving household. It was very caring. We didn't grow up with a lot of money. We lived in a single bedroom apartment in Mumbai. It was a big family, a joint family. And there was a lot of safety and love at home. But there was I didn't really understand religion in any way.
Right.
If at all, at a certain point in time in my life, I was, again, attracted to the West and the Western way of living, and
it can be attractive,
everything.
Right?
It is success, right? The money, the success,
the American dream,
and also I would say there's a certain aesthetic sense in the West.
Yeah,
things are done a certain way, quality.
Yes,
right. All of that was impressive, and so at a certain time, even if I worked 24 hours a day, I would still not be able to ace my tests like some of the kids that I was going to school with. And it did create a sense of inferiority complex. Yeah. And that was the first time I really started asking questions about, well, what's the purpose of my life?
Had you already, now, did you grow up bhakti?
No, I didn't.
Because your parents aren't.
No, I didn't. I grew up in a very pious, I could say religious household.
So what, secular?
It's not necessarily secular. So you could say Hindu because I grew up in India. Yeah. It's predominantly the religion. The philosophical basis was never really explained to me. But I grew up in a very loving household. It was very caring. We didn't grow up with a lot of money. We lived in a single bedroom apartment in Mumbai. It was a big family, a joint family. And there was a lot of safety and love at home. But there was I didn't really understand religion in any way.
Right.
If at all, at a certain point in time in my life, I was, again, attracted to the West and the Western way of living, and
it can be attractive,
everything.
Right?
It is success, right? The money, the success,
the American dream,
and also I would say there's a certain aesthetic sense in the West. Yeah, things are done a certain way, quality.
Yes,
right. All of that was impressive, and so at a certain time, I was not necessarily following any religion that I was raised in. In fact, I was a skeptic. Yeah. It's the best way I can put it.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
So when did you I'm trying to figure out where in this journey you found bhakti and how it lined up with you also wanting to work on Wall Street.
Yeah. So when I had that existential crisis in college, I've always had this questioning about death and dying. It started very early in my life.
Me too.
And I used to visualize losing loved ones. Yeah. And basically scare myself.
Totally. Into like a frenzy. Like, I know.
At night. But the question about death and dying just stayed with me throughout my entire life. And I looked for answers in physics. I looked for answers in math.
Yeah. No.
And I also looked for answers in books, philosophy. And I did find things that I felt answered it somewhat, but it never felt quite settled.
Right.
And I would say the first big existential crisis in my life was when I was at I.I.T, experiencing this like, my God, I thought I was smart, but here I'm like the dumbest kid. It was crushing to my sense of self, a loss of confidence. I would say I was depressed.
Yeah.
And I didn't know who to speak to. And it also exacerbated questions about death and dying, in the sense like what the purpose of life is. I also recognized that even if I had achieved a lot of success by that time in my life.
Yeah.
And I also realized that if this is what success led me to, what does the future really hold? And yet I didn't know anything else. Like the waves, the winds of ambition were still pretty strong and pushing me in a certain direction, but it felt empty. But I didn't have the words to articulate it. So February 27th, 1997, I had come back from school home. I lived in the dorm and I used to visit my family once a week, just come back home. And I was having dinner and I finished my dinner and I was just staring into my plate, and my mother looked at me and she said, hurry up, I have to close the kitchen. And I just looked up at her and I said, I want to know the meaning of my life. And she looked at me very affectionately and she said, well, finish your education, get a job, get married, and everything will be fine.
That's funny.
And I was like, don't you see it? Don't you see where this is leading you to? And then 5 days later, back in school, one of my friends invited me to a talk on the Bhagavad-gita in school. So at I.I.T,
Right.
this was happening. And I had seen posters for that program 6 months before. And something about it stopped me on my tracks even at that time, but I never took the time to go. And this friend of mine who invited me, I somehow trusted him because of how I saw he was kind in an environment that when you are at the best, you are people appreciate you for your smartness. At the worst, you're just like nobody wants to talk to you because you can't answer certain questions.
Right.
I found it a breath of fresh air to see somebody kind. And when he invited me, I said, okay, sure, I'll come with you. After a math quiz at 6 p.m. in the evening. And so he took me there and I felt like, if I don't really like what I hear, I'll sit at the back of the room. If I don't really like what I hear, I'll quietly slip out. And I went in there and there were only 2 other people in the room.
Oh, wow.
So I was pretty conspicuous.
Yeah, there was no sneaking out.
There was no sneaking out. I didn't want to be impolite. And I sat in the room and I heard the person talk. He seemed to be in his late 20s.
Okay.
A monk. Didn't look impressive at all. His clothes hadn't been ironed.
Yeah.
They had, just been washed, wrinkled. He was wearing glasses. And when he spoke, the topic that he spoke was about death and dying.
Wow.
And for 2 hours, I was just completely riveted, not only because of the topic, the nature of the topic and how timely it was for me, but also how clear and articulate the speaker was. And the depth to which he just unpacked the psychology around it that I had never heard anybody do. It was incredibly compelling. And after the talk was done, I just stayed there for 2 hours, just one-on-one, just talking to the presenter, the monk. And it was just, I felt like I had been understood deep down. Everything that I was going through, finally, like I felt I was seen.
I think anytime our sense of self is rattled or shaken, or at least for me, every time that happens and I have some kind of like existential, like what's next, what's happening, like this crazy transitional period or whatever, it does reignite fear around dying and death. And I don't know if it's because like maybe one part of me is dying and I'm growing into something else. I'm not sure, but I'm curious if you don't mind. So what did he say? Did it make you feel better? Like maybe someone's listening that having an existential crisis right now about death and dying. Like what can you tell them?
The simplest way I can say is that death is the ultimate existential crisis. And sometimes people will say, well, some people kill themselves because they feel death is the escape, because life itself feels so existentially crazy that I'm dying at every moment. that I just want to end it all. That's an extreme version. But then we also die small deaths. Every time our sense of identity is questioned in some way.
Right.
The loss of a loved one, the loss of a job, public speaking.
Yeah. Public shaming.
You know, I lose a cell phone.
Right. That's a big one. It's like feeling like losing a limb or something.
I didn't get the validation that I wanted.
Yeah.
We experience the same sense of self and identity that we have created for ourselves that dies at that moment or is dying, and there is panic. We experienced mini deaths many times in our life, and
it's hard to think about. Death is really hard to think about. All I know is that I want my daughter holding my hand.
Right.
When I die.
At least I'm seen by the person that loves me.
Like I want her there with me.
Yeah.
You know, that's it. And I'll be lucky if that happens. Like look how many, you don't know what's going to happen tomorrow or next week or fucking disease and accidents or like, you know, just, I don't know. Every time I fly, oh my God, flying. Every time I fly, I have an existential crisis because I think the plane's going down. Like I can't deal with turbulence. The last time I flew, there was a lovely woman next to me, Gladys, who held me and
I
prayed.
didn't know that about
she prayed on me and she was petting my hair and I was in her arms. I mean, I have a picture of her. She was like the most sweet, kind woman. We exchanged numbers because I felt like I was going to die. But yeah, death is really, it's a messed up thing. You know, it's not something that I love to think about, but I think about it multiple times a day.
But we can't avoid it.
We can't. Right. And then also it's like, reminds me like how lucky I am that I got to wake up today and at least experience, you know, I mean, some days I'm like, oh, this is annoying. Life is just hard. But most of the time I wake up and I'm like, wow, I had 2 friends that died like last year of cancer that were my age. Like that's so messed up, you know? So yeah, death is weird.
And it's when we really understand death, then we also understand life. And this is where the Gita begins.
Yeah.
And that was what was so compelling about the speaker, because this is how I was introduced to the Gita. The Bhagavad-gita, the opening of the book is the existential crisis of a person who has never lost
Arjuna
a single battle in his life.
Yeah.
He's a warrior and a hero who has, you know, from a point of success, this person has been incredibly successful. And yet he's facing the biggest war of his life and he experiences an existential crisis. He drops, he doesn't want to fight.
Right.
Experiences severe loss of courage. And that's where he has a conversation with his charioteer, Krishna, where he falls to his knees and asks for help. And that's where that's how the Gita unravels itself.
I never really thought about Arjuna having an existential crisis, but now that you're saying it, yeah, you're right. That makes a lot of sense.
It was the biggest loss of identity that he was having, because the war that he was about to fight and his opponents, he saw in the army, it was a fratricidal war. It was a war between cousins from the same family.
Right.
And they were kings. But on the other side, he saw the 2 people that had shaped his identity in a very big way. His teacher, who taught him martial arts, and his grandfather, who were incredibly close to him, but who were on the side of his opponents. And he had to fight this war. And that meant he had to kill him.
That's messed up.
And it was a real clash between attachment and duty for a higher cause. Again, I'm just summarizing.
Yeah, of course. I mean, it's a whole.
Thing.
Yeah, that's a great summary.
That's where it begins, and that's what was so compelling for me.
Right. So you have the existential crisis in college. You find bhakti. You find the Bhagavad-gita. You start practicing.
Yes, and that's when I started practicing. I started going to. So this monk invited me to come to the monastery. And, you know, it's one of those weird things where, like, you don't know why you're doing certain things, but something is calling you to take small steps.
Right.
And so I made a visit to the monastery, which was just incredibly impressioning. It created very strong impressions for me. Because
still there?
The kind of monks, and it's an amazing place. The kind of monks that they had PhD degrees. Some of them were working in very big positions in the banking industry. They had given all of that up to join a monastery, and these were not people who had escaped life.
Right.
And when you talk to them, you understood that they had all experienced. They were looking for bigger things. They were looking for deeper answers in life.
I just thought about Steve Jobs for a minute. Only because, like, he is someone who, the little I know about him, I mean, he obviously is someone was so smart, but he was searching.
That's right.
Yeah, I mean, he found Buddhism, right? But he was he was searching for deeper meaning, deeper asking questions, and found Buddhism.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so that gave me a sense of satisfaction that maybe I have to go deeper here, because the people that I am witnessing who are a part of the monastery are people that I would look up to from a point of view of their educational qualification, their backgrounds, where they come from. And that gave me, for the lack of a better term, and I think this is the most accurate term, that gave me faith to take my next step.
Which was
to study further, deepen my understanding, study with the monks.
But while still going to school.
School, yeah. And after I graduated, I had my job offer from the university. I was picked up by a strategy consulting firm called Deloitte to work in the US. That's how I came. That was my one step closer to going to Wall Street. And so I would say I started leading a pretty schizophrenic life, where there's this ambition and the inertia of the ambition pushing me in one direction, and then this calling that was slowly being fanned and flamed by the association that I was receiving in the monastery with the monks and studying the Gita.
Okay. So you moved to the US, you moved to New York. You start working at this consulting agency. You're on your way to being a hedge fund, icon, living on Central Park West in your penthouse. You start going to First and First. You start going to the Bhakti Center.
Well, I wanted to own a yellow convertible and a blue motorboat. That was my.
Listen, I want a pink, Porsche. So I also want inner peace. I don't know.
Anyway, so at that time, the Bhakti Center didn't exist.
It didn't. Okay.
It didn't exist. There were 3 monks who were living in an apartment on First Avenue and 4th Street, 125 East 4th Street.
Got it. You found them.
I found them.
Got it.
And it was very mystical how I found them too, because Deloitte had arranged for me to stay at the Marriott World Trade Center at that time. That was 2000. And for some reason, they had forgotten to pay for the room.
Oh my God.
It was on the 14th floor. And when I walked in, they said, well, your company hasn't paid for it. So if they don't pay by tomorrow, you can stay tonight. But if they don't pay by tomorrow, then you'll have to leave. So I was just sitting in the room, not knowing what to do. And I had the number to the monastery, and I just called them at night.
You called back in India?
No.
Oh, the one in the city.
Yeah,
okay,
it was just an apartment. Right. And they picked up the phone and they said, well, we have nothing to offer you except some space on the floor, but you're welcome to come. So I took my bags. I just came to the monastery, and my first night in New York was
not exactly a yellow convertible moment.
No, but it wasn't a monastery. But when I walked in, I felt at home.
Yeah.
And I can't explain that in any other way.
Were you meditating at this point?
Yeah, I had a decent meditation practice. I would say I was meditating for 2 hours a day.
There's all these studies that have come out now that show that your brain chemistry can change by meditating.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely.
I mean, you probably have a very interesting brain now that you've been meditating 2 hours a day, sometimes longer probably at some points, right? How many hours a day at the peak of meditating?
Well, still 2 hours.
Hours.
That was 2 hours. And then there were other practices that immersed me in different ways in spirituality, but meditation was specifically 2 hours. And then there were days where I have done meditation for 8 hours a day.
What? Rasanath, what do you mean? Do you mean for 8 hours you didn't, did you move at all?
I took some breaks.
But pretty much 8 hours.
You go good stretches in meditation.
What's going on in your head? Are you seeing God? Are you talking to God? What's going on? Is Krishna coming down and
Well,
giving
it's mostly in the beginning. You have to really fight your mind, and it's a daily battle. It's not that at some point in time, and sure enough, when people who really reach very advanced levels of meditation find it much easier. But I'm still a practitioner, and every day when I go in, it's a struggle.
Yeah. How often do you meditate now?
Yeah, 2 hours a day.
2 hours a day.
Yeah.
In the morning?
In the morning.
Dude, that's wild. That's really like I can do like, cause I was kind of doing TM a little, and I was doing 20 minutes or 25 minutes in the morning and then 20 minutes at night. But I can actually do that easily because I think I like to just take a break. But I mean, I started meditating when I met you, and you were, but it was very hard. Like I just kept being angry or thinking about angry thoughts and stuff. But I'm getting better at it. I am trying to, because, in AA, which I'm in, that's one of the, right. Yeah. And it's meditation and prayer is like a huge thing. Okay. So you start working on Wall Street, essentially.
Well,
right?
yeah, I was in consulting. And I was working for the financial services industry. I did that for 4.5 years. And
for how long?
4.5 years.
4.5 years while living in the monastery.
Well, I lived in the monastery in and out. So I used to go there on the weekends specifically. And then consulting is a traveling job. So I was on a plane every week.
Got it.
Going to, visit clients. So... for 4 years straight, I was just traveling, essentially. But then
and then Bank of America.
And then after business school, I went to business school. I went to Cornell.
Did you have an MBA?
I had an MBA, yes.
You're amazing. I didn't even an MBA from Cornell.
I knew that. I read about it.
I mean, I knew that too because I remember, but it's like, I also just like, don't even think of you as like, well, when I met you, you were wearing an orange, and we're going to get into like why like people call bhakti Hare Krishna, like they call everyone Hare Krishnas. Is that like, that's like a rude term. It's not like rude, but it's just like what people like call that religion, the Hare Krishnas. We'll get into that. But when I just think of you as so spiritual and a monk and almost like a guru, but you also do have like an MBA from Cornell and, have this like other side of you. But, okay. So you go to Bank of America, you go to work at Bank of America after you get your MBA.
But when I was getting my MBA, right before I had my banking offer, I had a near-death experience. This was my second encounter with death.
Oh my God.
And a much closer one, literally. And it happened at a time when, I was doing well in school, and, the dream was very close to being realized.
Right.
I had decided at that time that I wanted to be an investment banker. And this was 2005, 2006, banking and banking jobs and the kind of fanfare around banking was at an all-time high.
Yeah, it was right before the recession.
Right before the recession. Yeah. And so this was...
yeah, you're about to get that job with those bonuses that those people on Wall Street get. It's like...
Huge bonuses. Yeah. A sign-in bonus at that time, I mean, we're talking 2005, 2006. The sign-in bonus just to accept your job, the banks were paying you anywhere between $60,000 to $70,000.
Wow. It's incredible.
Yeah.
And that's worth whatever that is nowadays. That's probably even more.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I don't know how. I think after the financial crisis, things just fell and regulations came in. But at that time, bonuses were just at an all-time high. And the near-death experience was I went to the Cornell University hospital for a regular blood test. And after the blood test, I was walking out and I collapsed. And when I woke up, I found myself in a stretcher, and my hands and feet were paralyzed. They were stretched out in a very weird fashion. My fingers were frozen, and I wanted to speak, but I couldn't speak. It dawned on me that this could be it, right? Like the first thought that went through my mind was, well, who will tell my mother? I'm very close to my family.
Yeah.
And I was in that paralyzed condition for 4.5 hours.
What was it?
I have this condition called it's a psychosomatic condition called the colloquial term for it is a vasovagal reaction.
Oh,
some of us have the vagal nerve is a very active vagal nerve, and so when it perceives any sort of external attack, there is a way in which it's basically asking that. Yeah,
it's fight or flight.
Yeah, and it's a very unconscious response.
Right.
And you don't know when you will have it.
Wow.
Right. So I didn't know I had it. At that time, it was the vagal nerve sends signal to the.
I wonder what you were
brain.
perceeving as a threat.
It was the needle.
It was the needle.
It was the needle.
Oh, interesting. I thought maybe it was the job offer. I don't know. You're like, I'm entering evil Wall Street. No.
I didn't know how shallow it was until I got there. But before that, it was the attraction was still very much alive.
Right.
And so that experience really made me I would say, I remember after that experience, 2 days later, just sitting on, the campus. So the Cornell University campus is probably one of the best campuses college campuses in America. And it's fall season, you're looking at like the Cayuga Lake, the Finger Lakes region, sitting on top of the hill because the university is on, and just like tears flowing down my eyes, really understanding that I had been given a second chance and I have to really make use of this life. I didn't know what that meant, but I felt very deep down that I have to understand what my purpose is. And philosophically, although I knew, I had read the Gita multiple times and studied it deeply, I hadn't still realized a lot of the concepts, because I felt like I was living in a comfortable cocoon of my ambition.
Right.
And I could have a lot of armchair philosophy, talk very intelligently, but be completely empty and not understand anything about who I am or what is my relationship with myself. Is there a God? And what is my relationship with God?
Yeah.
And so that was the time when I made the decision. I still couldn't just quit Wall Street because the ambition was just so strong.
Wow.
But I didn't know anything else, any other way to do it other than live in a monastery and work on Wall Street at the same time.
Which is wild. How would people react when you would tell them that? Like at Bank of America, the guys are going out to, go to a strip club and eat steak and probably do blow or something. You're like, I'm going back to the monastery. I mean, what would they say? You would wake up probably at 4 a.m. to meditate for 2 hours and then get to Wall Street by 7 or whatever, because the market opens, at 8 a.m. or whatever it is.
Early mornings.
And these guys probably are coming back from the after hours or whatever. Not every Wall Street guy's like that, obviously, but a lot of them are a mess. How would people react to the fact that you were like living in a monastery?
Well, it was tricky because I was that's an understatement. It's definitely the odd man out.
Yeah, you were the odd man out. That's for sure.
And I was the odd man out on both sides. Like I was the odd man
in the monastery too. Yeah, of course.
And so the people
but
in the monastery.
You were finding your way. That's how you had to do it, right?
Had to do it that way. It was a customized path. That's just what I had to do. And the people in the monastery, I experienced a lot of encouragement, love and affection, but at the same time, I was always an outsider. I was attached to the material.
Right. And the whole point of the Gita, right? It talks about
so
attachment.
The monks looked at me as like, he's definitely attached to the material. I don't think he'll really.
Well, they probably saw you as suffering in a way, no?
Yes, definitely. Right. And which is why their empathy and their kindness was very genuine, very real.
Yeah.
And at the same time, I was still a person who was attached to the material there. So I didn't fully belong. And Wall Street, I didn't fully belong either, because people saw me as, what, you don't drink?
Right.
What's wrong with you?
Yeah, people think that about me too. So.
And I was not drinking tea or coffee. There was I was living, following very sacred principles of monastic life.
Yeah.
I didn't get validation from either place. I didn't feel like I belonged.
That's hard.
In either place. And yet, this was the only way I could figure out what I needed to do. I had to be led to answers and live the tension, really live it. Yeah. And it's a very uncomfortable place to be, because usually desire is to go to one side so that we can feel like we belong.
Right.
But that's exactly what I couldn't do. I didn't want to just belong. I wanted to get there from a place where I knew
It's an
deep down,
authentic way.
this is what I had to do.
Yeah.
It was a pretty, I would say, hard 2 years. I'd worked very long hours.
Yeah,
An average day was 13, 14 hours a day. You could be called into midnight to run numbers on a deal.
Right.
The money was there.
Yeah.
I saw real unhappiness on Wall Street.
Yeah, what was that? Yeah, what was going on Wall Street from your that must have been very dark.
It was, and you could cut the shallowness with a knife, right? It was just so thick.
Yeah.
And yet there was this. They were really smart people,
right?
And yet somehow you feel like there was a jadedness. You have everything and yet you wanted more, right? And there was just and you could see how the substitute for true connection with the self was money, power, prestige,
right?
And it never quite filled the bucket.
Oh my God, that's how I feel about my last job that I had, I mean, really, like I'm just relating in terms of, that I just started thinking about and it's not totally random, but it popped into my head. And I know that when Occupy Wall Streit started, you were down there, right? You were down there. Yeah. You were helping people meditate.
I had a very different perspective on it.
Right.
I didn't belong. So one of the questions from the journal was well, which side do you belong? The Wall Street Journal
did an interview at that time. Cool.
And I said, I don't belong to either side.
Either side, exactly. But I feel like we're having a reckoning as a society now of there has been a movement of, anti-capitalism, but I don't think it's about attachment. I don't think people are we're too attached to material stuff. We should work on things as a society, even though it feels like how am I trying to say this? It feels like something is just really missing from civilization right now. I don't know what it is. And I guess it's been kind of a long time coming when you think about Occupy Wall Street, and then you think about what we've been through in the last 8 years, and the government and just politics and the polarization and the division and wanting to be on one side and to feel like you're not, then having to choose a side. And I don't know, just
we have put our trust and faith in so many things.
Yeah.
And those have systematically disappointed us.
Yes.
And I think this includes spirituality and religion. We have reached this place where we have become a cynical society where you talk about the cancel culture. Everything needs to be stripped down because we are afraid to put faith anymore. We are afraid to open our hearts because we have been hurt. We have been disappointed by things, by systems, by people that we put our faith in. And it's the same thing with riches and money. It disappoints us on a deeper level.
So what do we put our faith into?
I don't see how the way I see opportunity right now is it pushes us in only one direction: deeper self-inquiry.
Yeah.
And to me, the deeper radical self-inquiry is the only path through which we can find the answers. It takes work to do that.
Yeah.
And many times what we desire is an outcome without going through the process.
Right. That's
those shortcuts never lead us to what we are truly seeking. So this is a time where I think we have to ask the bigger questions about life. Who am I? What am I here for? Where am I going? What's my connection with the universe? And systematically try to understand these.
I mean, I feel like those are the questions that motivate me every day. It's weird to think that people don't ask that stuff, but I guess not everybody does. I don't know. I guess they don't. Or a lot of people do.
People ask, and how,
but they don't know where to
where to start.
Yeah.
How to go through this. It takes guidance.
Yeah.
It takes guidance from people who have walked before us. It also takes walking through our own fears. Like, for example, when I finally decided to join the monastery, it was hard. It was really hard.
Well, you had to give up your.
Oh, it
you
was
had to
like
let go of that yellow convertible.
Yeah, the money, the dreams, right? The years of investment in those dreams and an identity that I had built of success.
Yes.
And to go into a monastery and be nobody, sleep on the floor, have no health insurance. It was definitely letting go of a sense of identity that I'd so carefully worked very hard to create, and then my family, would it be letting them down,
right?
And all of that, and I used to have nightmares about
right. That makes sense. Yeah,
about those things, and you have to walk through your fears to get to the deeper answers. But you need the right kind of guidance to be able to walk through them.
You do. You can't do it alone.
It's hard to do it alone.
Yeah,
some people do it alone.
I guess some people do. They end up like gurus or whatever.
They're exceptions.
They are exceptional.
And for most of us to do it, then require guidance. And that doesn't mean that that the rest of us are not exceptional.
Yeah.
It takes courage to walk this journey, and it also takes help.
Right.
And through the help and through the courage, we also ultimately discover what true humility means, without which you can't understand what the deepest self is.
Right. Okay, we've talked so much about the Bhagavad-gita, so for people who are listening who are like, what is that? Sure. And how does it relate to bhakti, and what is bhakti? Can you just like kind of summarize that?
Sure. The Bhagavad-gita is the classic text on yoga philosophy. So if you've gone to a yoga studio at some point in time, you hear things from the Gita.
Right.
It is the classic on yoga philosophy, and it's a conversation between two people, Krishna and Arjuna, or in other words, you can also say God and the soul, God and an individual spirit, on what the goal of life is.
I love that.
And the context of the conversation, the dialogue, it's a dialogue of discovery where Arjuna, as I described before, is going through an existential crisis. And Krishna, who is this charioteer and dear friend and mentor, becomes his teacher. And he reveals to Arjuna the deeper layers of the philosophical truth around existence and what the goal of our life is. And it's 18 chapters, and each chapter is called, or in Sanskrit, which is what the text is written in. It's beautiful poetry.
Yeah, it is beautiful.
And it has very rich philosophical layerings to it.
And also, to be clear, there's so many people, many intellects, and just anyone really loves reading the Gita. I remember reading what's his name? Ralph Waldo Emerson.
That's right.
Emerson loved reading it.
Yes,
and,
Einstein, Gandhi.
Right.
It has really inspired many great thinkers.
Yeah, it's a beautiful book.
And then it's being taught in business schools now.
Wait, what? Really? Because of you, or
no?
Because I want to get to. I also. we're going to get to Upbuild NYC. We are going to get there. So, can you talk about bhakti and Hare Krishna and that and the connection and why people get
the
things?
Gita essentially speaks about 4 ways of self-realization. The way of action, which is called karma. The way of knowledge, which is called jnana. The way of meditation, which is called ashtanga. This is what is taught in yoga studios. It's ashtanga yoga. And the way of bhakti, which is devotion. And ultimately, all the 4 of them are paths, but they converge. At a certain point in time, you'll see all of them converge into one single. It's the bringing together of the body, which is action, the mind, which is knowledge and focus,
meditation,
and the heart, which is love and devotion. And the coming together of the 3 faculties of our existence, which is the body, mind, and heart, and how to use the 3 of them and bring them together to realize the true self, which is the spirit.
I love that.
And
but also the Gita, the Gita doesn't say the Gita does say that attachment to things and to material is suffering, but also it doesn't say well, you better just stop working and give up everything. No, it talks about intention.
Right. Also, when when the speaker of the Gita, Krishna, is telling Arjuna doesn't want to fight.
Right.
Krishna is telling Arjuna that he has to do his duty and fight.
Right.
So it's not spoken to someone who was living in a mountain. It's spoken to a person who was in the world, an administrator, a leader, who had big responsibilities and was fighting for justice. It was not spoken to someone who had decided to give up everything in the world. It was meant to make someone act in the world in a different way.
Yeah.
And what the Gita talks about is the consciousness with which we approach our work is what leads us closer to the true self or further away from it. So when we live our life, and this is where the concept of attachment becomes very important, when we are very attached to what we want, that attachment will bring suffering, but the suffering is meant to awaken us to the fact that we are working from a place of the ego,
not working from a higher consciousness,
a place of the true self.
Yeah.
And the challenge with the ego is the ego will be attached. Every time the ego is attached, it will pursue it in different ways. There can be healthy ways of pursuing it, but most of the time we pursue it in unhealthy ways, and that's where we control. And we also become destructive in the sense that at a certain point in time, my attachments are so strong that other people have to pay a price for me to get what I want. What it does to others and to the self.
It's ruining the world.
It is.
It's ruining humanity and our country.
Yes.
Yeah. So is there a way that we can change as a society?
Well, it's important to understand why we do what we do. Have you seen this TED Talk by Bhagavad-gita, who speaks about
I know who that is, but I haven't
the power
seen
of
it.
addiction, the addiction to power. It's a very powerful TED Talk. And in that, he conveys the basis of how we are all addicted to our ego attachments, right? And when we look at substance abuse, for example, we think, well, that's addiction, and this is not, or I am not, right?
Right.
But when I went to Wall Street, I saw a very different kind of,
that's addiction to
the
money.
thing with addiction is that you only want more. The dosage is only upped in time, right? And that's what happens to money, power.
Well, as you were talking about the Gita, I was also thinking as you were talking about the 3 faculties, and, I was thinking about like my 12-step program, and how it's, there's a lot of similarities, right? Because it is about asking the deeper questions and a higher power and getting to know yourself and your connection to yourself and just being in a group of people and having it not, it's just people are just there to get better. There's and no one's in charge, it's everyone's equal, you know what I mean? Like it's not anything that there's no one in charge, and there's no money being made in AA or anything like that, which is a beautiful kind of thing. So you become a monk.
I do.
Yeah, you become a monk, and that's how I met you. I came to you. I was sober at the time too. I was looking deeper. I found you. I started going to the Bhakti Center. I started learning about the Gita. It was an amazing few years of my life. Now I'm a Jew, as you know, but I'm still, I still read the Gita. But then you left. And I don't want to, go, it's like, obviously, how many years were you?
I was there for 4 years, a little more than 4 years.
And I know that your guru helped you make the decision to, leave and start a family and do all these.
Go in and leave.
Oh, did he really?
Oh, yes. He was extremely influential. My guru and my teacher, Rasanath Swami, who has been a lifelong monk, who grew up middle of 3 Jewish kids in Highland Park, Chicago.
Yeah, he's amazing.
And left home at the age of 17 in search of truth. And hitchhiked from Luxembourg all the way to India, which is a pretty wild story in of itself.
It's a crazy story. And I have to tell you this. I don't even know if I probably have told you this, but when I went to go see him speak at, Jiva Mukti, I guess, right? And when I went, I was like really kind of thinking about like abandoning like AA, and I was like, oh, I'm so over it. Like, I hate it. And I was like going through like all these like things, and I'm like, maybe like Rasanath Swami will have like an answer for me, but I didn't want to ask any questions, but someone raised their hand and said, what do I do with feelings of regret? And he said, well, I have a friend who's a recovering alcoholic. And in AA, instead of feeling regret, they help someone else. with what they learned from what they went through.
Yes.
And I'm like, holy shit, Radhanath Swami just told me to stay in AA. That's the craziest thing. But it was really such a treat getting to meet him. And
I've known him for 26 years.
Wow.
That's the monastery I walked into in Mumbai.
I need to go to a monastery.
I met Radhanath Swami, 26 years ago.
I mean, he's met, I've seen pictures of him with like the Pope and Mother Teresa. And he's such a well-respected monk.
Yes.
Really like a spiritual leader.
Yes. And you would never see, he's still the humble man who sleeps
extremely
on the
humble.
floor,
Very.
Doesn't have a credit card.
Yeah.
And his heart is just with it's untouched by the world in many ways.
But this is funny because we've talked about this before. And by the way, you're the original Jay Shetty.
No, actually, he's a very good friend of mine.
Is he really?
Yeah. We first met when he came. He came.
I
to the
didn't know that
monastery
he
here.
was in bhakti. I had no idea.
Yeah, he's a very sincere practitioner.
Is he?
Bhakti, both him and his wife.
Okay, then I'm trusting you because I'm very skeptical of people. So I was like, hold on, didn't he like marry J-Lo and Ben Affleck? Maybe not.
Yes, he did.
He did. Okay, how does one? And this is not directed at him, and obviously we can't answer for him. But how does one become so successful and stay unattached to power and prestige when they get it? Right? He's very powerful and he has a lot of prestige now. He's marrying Bennifer. It's a big deal.
It is a big deal. I also think I've known him for a while, and he has a very strong spiritual practice, and he has very strong guidance from Radhanath Swami. Different people express their purposes in different ways. Some people, both from a karmic perspective and what their calling is, and the skills and talents that they have been given, when they are utilized, it takes them to a place where they become famous.
Yeah.
And through that, then if their consciousness is maintained and still very deeply connected with what's real and what's pure,
right, then they can deal in the world.
They can actually do immense good,
right,
with it. So again, it's like in the knife in the hands of a surgeon can cure you. The exactly the same knife in the hands of a terrorist can take away your life. Right? So the knife is neutral. Wealth is neutral.
Right.
It's our relationship with it. Fame is neutral. It's our relationship with it. Sure enough, when those things come, they bring their own challenges with it.
Right.
Which is why we have to be so equipped to work through them. I can also say for myself, like, I had money when I was working on Wall Street. And it brought, as I said, I struggled with the fact that I have to let go of an identity. It was sweet in its own way.
Right.
For the ego.
Yeah.
But when you truly, and this is why you also have to be surrounded with people who can actually tell you what is true and keep you pure and humble. And I can say with the experience in my life, I'm very heavily dependent on it. So this is a Radhanath Swami quote again. One of my friends, this was in 2008. Some of these conversations just stay with you because of the impact that it has. He asked Radhanath Swami, well, how much should you give? He was talking about charity. And Radhanath Swami's answer was, give till it hurts a little bit. And the idea, what he was trying to say was, you don't know you're giving until you feel like, oh my gosh, I worked so hard for this. And I'm giving it away, right? Like,
yeah.
And you reach that place. It's like when you do push-ups and you're used to doing push-ups, the time that you're really breaking and building muscle is when you reach, let's say, 50, and then you say, I'm going to do 10 more.
And it hurts.
And then it hurts.
Yeah.
And what I recognized was I have to make small sacrifices to walk through the fear. So I had I broke things down into smaller chunks. And I said, okay, in the next 3 months, I'm going to try to learn how to live without this. And the first few days are like, oh my gosh, But then as you start easing into it, you see like, wow, it's not made much of a difference. I feel a little free. Because I have now developed a muscle to learn how to live without something.
Yeah.
Right. So it takes conscious effort and small steps, some very good guidance of people, a few people. I'm not talking about a lot of people, but a few people. When you find them, you keep them very close.
Yep.
And you'll see, and when you do it systematically and consistently, you see, this is not about a dramatic effect. When I came to the conclusion that I wanted to join the monastery, there was no background music. It was not dramatic. It was just, it felt clear.
Yeah.
Right? There was nothing, I would say, there was nothing heroic in that sense of the term about it. It just felt very clear. It just felt like, okay, it's like when you have climbed the first 10, 11 steps, and you say, okay, step number 12. Here.
Yeah.
That's it. This is what I have to do. The last big project that I worked on at Bank of America was for Playboy. Which is, which I was a technology, media, and telecom banker, and this was a project, taking Playboy private. I had to run the numbers. I had to do strategy research for them. One of my colleagues walked by my desk, and he was looking at what I was researching on, and he said, "Why do you get to work on the good projects?" And I was thinking, little do you understand what I'm going through right now.
That's funny.
But it's those small steps, and then what also happens, this is the amazing thing, the universe, based on your sincerity, conspires.
Yes.
And works with you. The winds actually start to push things in a certain direction. And I can also say that these experiences are mystical, only because when you take those steps, we don't, because we think that we are in control of everything. But all that we are in control of are our desires and our efforts. But when we are sincere, we see how things align.
Oh, and it's crazy. Every major decision that I think I've made in my life, it was not really mine. I was being pushed completely to start Married to the Mob. How the fuck did I do that? I don't know. The universe did it. Finding Rasanath, ending up on the show, leaving, becoming a Jew. I mean, everything. It's been like, I've been pushed to make these decisions for sure.
So it needs effort, and it also needs a calling, something pulling you from the other side, right? So you see the forces at work, right? The self is, you're putting effort. The effort is being supported by things that happen around you, by people. So there is a push effect. And then there is also, we need a vision for our life. We need to have a clear sense of who and what we want to become. And that vision, when that vision marinates and it becomes a deep emotional thrust, then what you experience from the other side is a pull, and the push and the pull work together.
When I envision what I want to become, though, it's definitely like someone that's really rich. Like, I'm sorry, but I also I definitely want inner peace, and I want clarity, and I want serenity, but I also want to do it in a 5-bedroom apartment that I own. I'm sorry. And
you don't have to be sorry.
I mean, I'm just being honest. But also we're living in a fucking city that's it's expensive,
yeah,
right?
Sure,
it's really expensive. It's I have no other options but to figure out how to make more money, because the prices are going up with everything. It's not even I have a freaking choice, We're not living in wherever, Minnesota, I don't know, where things are less expensive, but I guess I could move upstate or something. Probably, but I like it here.
I get used to you doing that. Stop it. I can't even stop it.
I can't live up there.
You can't live higher than Lower East Side.
I like it here. I like it here, but
you're a New York woman.
I am a New York woman, even though I've been going to Miami a lot. Anyway.
Well, the most important thing that the Gita teaches, this is a very, again, as I said, it was spoken to a warrior. It was not spoken to a person who was living as a monk.
Right.
But the idea here is that we have a psychophysical nature. We have it, which is a lot of work that we do at Upbuild, is really helping people understand what their inner psychophysical nature is. And what's important here is we don't go against it, but we use it to then uncover our spiritual nature.
I like that.
And that's the harmony between the material what we have, the gifts that we have been given, and the spiritual. The body is a vehicle. It's like a car.
We don't have to change who we are. We just have to figure out who we are.
What is important is when we know who we are psychophysically, we engage it in the most constructive way.
What's psychophysically?
So we all have a certain nature. I can say, and Jay Shetty speaks about it in his first book, Think Like a Monk too. Some of us have a nature to be more renounced.
Right.
It's there in the system. It's there in the bloodstream.
Yeah.
Some of us, we are very attracted to justice. I can't pull myself away. Even if I see injustice on the street, I want to step in and do something about it.
Yeah.
Right. Some of us know very well how to run businesses.
Right. Innately.
Some of us are artists. We have artistic inclination. We have very creative. We have been given a certain nature and an attraction towards it. The unfortunate thing about that is the way this current society is structured is we somehow feel like our nature has to lead us to making money.
I know. It's so messed up.
Right, because that's the
goal,
right,
with everything.
Right.
Money.
But what's interesting is that when your nature gives you something, you can engage in activities that your nature has given. You can make money. Of course, you do have to spend time making money.
Right.
But then you can always engage your nature in a very constructive, fulfilling way. In a way that eventually helps you walk towards your true self.
Do you think social media has played a role in everyone wanting to be rich?
Of course.
Oh, absolutely, right? Because people just think that everyone else is rich, even though they're not, but like they're acting rich on Instagram, or like some people are, and like you're now seeing how they live and you're like, holy shit, I want to live like that too. The Kardashians, oh my God, they're flying in private jets. Like, I want that also. And it's like, this is a very small amount of people are living like this, right?
Yes. And what you will also, and this is where honesty is necessary. And I can say this from my experience on Wall Street. I saw big bonuses. I saw people who had made huge bonuses in their life. And sometimes when you can become very personal with them and have very personal conversations with them, they will tell you very honestly how their life is empty. And I would say I have had the privilege, and I deeply appreciate those conversations that happened in the dead of the night sometimes when we were still working together, and you're just talking.
Right.
Somehow, because of perhaps who I was living in a monastery, eventually it led to people trusting me in a certain way where they actually speak very honestly to you. And the one conviction that I gained through that experience, and it's only continued further, is that material things can't fulfill what the spirit wants. It's like being in a desert and, you can see a mirage and you can run towards it and you can put it in your mouth, but it still doesn't quench the thirst.
I think if you and Kim Kardashian got together, you could make a lot of cool shit happen. I really think so.
I agree with that. I really agree with that.
Yeah. Like that would be you guys would be a force to be reckoned with.
I'd be happy to meet her.
You know what? Skims should hire you and Upbuild to like implement humanity into their company.
You said that 3 times. I'm sorry. What is Upbuild?
I know Upbuild. We're gonna get to that.
I'm so curious now.
We're gonna get to that because that's so you are living in the monastery. You were monk for 4 years, and then you and Rasanath Swami have this conversation about maybe you're gonna
transition. Hari and I, we were very close friends. We had built a strong sense of brotherhood.
Yes.
A few of us there in the monastery, we went through all of these experiences together, and it gave us some insights that as we started doing some workshops based on the Enneagram, organizations started inviting us to, like, can you do this for our team? This was extremely helpful, and it just started like we were being
took on a life of its own, right?
One person's put it very articulately, after a workshop. She said, I think I know what she had worked at the Fed before, and she very much a person in the world. And she said, I think you're actually bringing the monastery to the real world. And Hari and I looked at each other and we said, wow, that rings very true. not that we're asking people to be monks,
Right.
but the consciousness,
Implementing the consciousness.
implementing the
Yes.
consciousness of service,
Yes.
because that's the core principle of monastic life, is living a life of service.
Yeah.
And we can all serve in many different ways. So that was the second reason. We had a nature, or to teach, facilitate,
what is it called?
Psychophysical nature, teach,
nature.
facilitate, coach. That was pulling us in a certain direction. And a monastic life requires a certain degree of cloisteredness.
Yeah.
And we saw that we were very social people. We love people. And,
Yeah.
and when the brotherhood in the monastery started to decrease, we also felt that we didn't have the strength to continue to do that, because we needed a bigger family. The support structure was what really kept us going. So that's when we talked to Rasanath Swami, he said, I think you should do this, you should continue doing this, but do it differently. And so he asked for us to get married, because the idea of marriage is that you live with a person, you actually build a family, and that family will continue the work of purifying you.
Right.
Because you have to take responsibilities.
Yeah.
You have to continue
Kids
to
purify you if
big
you love
time,
them.
right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And it's the same thing in the monastery. When you're living in the monastery with 20 other people with no door to close behind you, everything you carry is out in the open. You have to take responsibility for your stuff. And it's the same thing when you live in married life. It's you have to take responsibility for your things. And so the work still is continuing.
Right.
It's just continuing in a different form. And so that was I would say I wasn't too keen to leave the monastic life. I had worked very hard to get there. And then I also realized that I had become attached to a form of living. And I was being asked to change that.
Right.
And you learn detachment on a deeper level.
What a journey. What a fucking... I'm just cursing because I know I can now, because you're not a monk. So I can say, what a fucking journey. I'm just kidding. Well, first of all, when I first... the best thing is when I first met you and I went and had lunch with you, I was so scared. I'm like, oh my God, he's going to maybe know that I have a brand. And I put bitch on t-shirts, and he's going to think I'm like, ugh. And then you were like, I love your brand. Like, I looked it up. It's great. I was like, whoa, thank you. And you appreciated it. And I appreciated that. You accepted me for who I was, So you and Hari Prasad and maybe one other person now started Upbuild NYC.
Yes, that's right.
So can you...
So Upbuild is a leadership development company, and we primarily do workshops and executive coaching, one-on-one, and group coaching, mostly in organizations, but we also work with individuals, because everybody in an organization is an individual at the end of the day.
Can you name any of the companies? Like, are you allowed to publicly say what some of the companies were? I think it's out there in the press,
yes,
some of it.
I mean, some of it, we've worked with L'Oreal, we've worked with, many hedge funds across.
Wow, with hedge funds.
Yeah, hedge funds.
What do you do there?
With big banks.
What do you do? Like, what do you do there when you go? Like, how does it work? Like, what do you say to them? Like, stop being assholes? Like, oh, you work with leadership.
We primarily work with leadership.
Stop being greedy assles.
Well, the idea is that, see, everybody is struggling with something.
Facts.
Everybody is, right? And when you help them understand what the struggle is and help them grow through it, they show up differently. And again, it's small incremental steps. It takes time, but it does affect the entire organization when a leader shows up with a different consciousness. And our work is to help leaders show up with a different consciousness.
Okay.
And that's what we do with venture capital, worked across a lot of the tech companies.
Well, yeah, I feel like they're a little more aware. They're run by younger people maybe too.
The challenges are there across the board. It's still ambition driving.
Yes, that's true. Money driven, material
power. Things are still there. And then how do we? So it's not to say you can just gift these things up overnight, but the idea is, again, money is neutral, power is neutral. In whose hands? What's your consciousness as you wield it? What's your consciousness as you exercise it? So the idea here is the the more self-aware a leader becomes, the more the leader comes from a place of making higher choices, and that affects everybody. And that's the work that we do at Upbuild.
Beautiful.
One-on-one group.
So if anyone's interested, they can join one of your groups, right? You're doing these kind of workshops.
Yeah, and
right?
we also
The
run a lot of
Enneagram.
community events,
Yeah.
which are no cost. You can join us.
Really?
Yeah, and remembering who we are.
Oh,
which
remembering
I
who we are.
invited
I'm
you
going
as
to join
well.
that one. Say hi to everybody.
Nothing, and of course the workshops. We also
They're also very fairly priced. I mean, your workshops are so fairly priced. I mean, it's
our desire is the money helps us sustain our lives in New York,
Right.
and our to continue doing the work.
yes.
And there is always a sliding scale. The most important thing that we want to do is work through all of the suffering and become our truer higher self. Really,
I'm going to highly suggest for anyone listening or watching that you do the Enneagram workshop because the Enneagram workshop, I learned so much about myself more than I had. I mean, more in that one workshop than like a year of therapy, really. Seriously, it's incredible. And you can look up what the Enneagram is. It's deeper, obviously, than like personality type test thing, but operating in your lower consciousness, and you'll be the negative,
it's
3, whatever. It's crazy how it works. Like, who created the Enneagram? How did they know all of this?
The Enneagram again it's been passed down in tradition. It's a mystical science, and when you study it very deeply, you understand the scientific basis of it. Modern psychology. There's a lot of research being done on the Enneagram now. Research papers have been written. We have put out a white paper based on that research as well.
Really?
Yeah.
Where is that?
It's on our website,
Oh,
or
great.
if you can just email
I'm
us
just
and send
gonna
it
go.
across. But essentially there is a very famous research done on temperaments and what a temperament is. You'll see a child, very early in life, when a child is a baby, has a certain temperament.
Right.
And that research suggested that, and this is independent of the Enneagram, that it classify temperaments into 9 kinds.
Wow.
And the Enneagram essentially
9.
talking about 9 different temperaments.
That's so interesting.
9 different ego lenses, and 9 different ways of seeing the world that appears very different when it's healthy and appears very different when it's unhealthy.
I'm working on being my higher self, so I'm not an evil, unstoppable force. Just kidding, I'm not. But yeah, I mean, I'm honestly more of like I'll like just destroy myself, not other people. You know what I mean? I'm more of like my own worst enemy.
It's true for everybody. As the ego starts to become more and more destructive, everybody destroys themselves and other people around them. It's just a natural outcome of
human nature,
of not dealing with our suffering in a healthy way.
Oh my God. I can honestly just talk to you forever. I'm so glad we reconnected. I'm so glad you came on the podcast. This is everything. So many good sound bites. I feel like some of this stuff's going viral. We need power. We need it to go viral. Just kidding.
We want the exact opposite.
No, but you know what I really feel? I really feel like I honestly am like, I don't give a shit about being successful anymore. Like I had a brand that I was like had my peak when I was like 27, like, and making so much money at that age, and then got like fucking pounded down and then came back up again. Like got pounded down again. Like, it's like, even if this podcast, like, I know sometimes Joe will be like, man, this next year we're gonna be making $1 million in ad sales. I'm like, whatever, Joe. Like, I'm like, yeah, but I honestly don't give a shit if only 2 people listen to this. You want to know why? Because I'm getting satisfaction from this.
That's what happens when you follow a calling.
Yeah, like I
not
got
about-
to sit here and talk to you about stuff that's important to me. And I haven't even, like, it was important for me to do this podcast because it was not a calling, but it was like important for me to do things that were authentic to myself, right? And I think for years being on the show and having like my being not manipulated, but like, having my story manipulated or having to be in fake fight situations or something. It's like, I kind of almost lost my sense of identity and got further away from who I actually am. And I don't like being further away from who I am. I need to be aligned.
Every experience in life is working towards that.
Yeah.
The good ones and the not so good ones.
Mind, body, spirit.
And it's working towards the alignment of the mind, body, and spirit. So if we can look at our experiences in life, what is it really trying to teach me? We will be surprised at how many things we discover about ourselves. Some of them would be confronting,
Right.
but in a way that actually brings growth.
All right. Thank you for coming on the pod, Rasanath. Where can people find Upbuild?
Upbuild.com.
Just
Very
upbuild.com.
simple. Yeah, very simple.
Great.
And we also have been recording podcasts.
Oh, great.
We just put things that we have learned in our own life and still continue to do. We say our life is our laboratory. So we are all constantly discovering through our own suffering and work and striving.
And the podcast is also Upbuild?
It's called Upbuilding the Self.
Upbuilding the Self. Oh, that's a good one.
It's on Spotify and iTunes.
Oh, great. Rasanath has a calming effect. I don't even feel like promoting myself. I'm awake right now and I'm not attached to anything. I'm going to go throw my Chanel bag out. No, I'm just kidding. Okay. Follow me at Leah Mob. Follow at the Leah McSweeney Show. Subscribe on YouTube. Leave a comment. And you can also email any listener letters, maybe questions, comments at,
The Leah McSweeney Show at
Show at gmail.com. There's too many things to remember. Thanks for tuning in, everybody.